I will teach you how to ride. I will teach you like a panther. Yes, go, stop, go, stop, go, stop, go, stop. Like a panther, 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 like a panther. Find other panthers, make baby panthers. You're free to roam the dune sea. Go, like a panther, 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 like a panther. Go, stop, go, stop, go, stop, go, stop. Like a panther, 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 like a panther. Find other panthers, make baby panthers. You're free to roam the dune sea. Go, like a panther, like a make baby panthers, like a panther, like a panther. Go, like a panther, 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 like a make baby panthers, like a panther. Free to roam the dune sea. Go.
Hey everyone, it is Thursday, which means it is time for another episode of Bad Writing. Now, normally we do news nights on Thursdays, but occasionally we like to come back and do the Bad Writing episodes. So if you guys are interested in the news stuff, go to saltiner.com, check it out on our blog. We're doing lots of news posts every day. We're talking movie news, TV news, video game news, all that good stuff. And we are posting there daily, so go check that out if you want your news fix for all the entertainment-related stuff. But once a month at least, we're going to be doing bad writing episodes where I get an expert panel together to analyze bad writing, whether it be movies or TV shows or what have you. And today we're going to be talking about the first season of Book of Boba Fett, now that it has been concluded. Just a warning that we are going to be going into spoilers, so if you haven't seen the finale of the Book of Boba Fett, please be sure to catch us on a replay. You can find all the bad writing episodes in a playlist over at the Salty Nerd YouTube channel, which you can get to by saltynerdvideo.com, or just simply by, searching for the Salty Nerd Podcast on YouTube. And with me today, it is my great honor to introduce my expert panel. First and foremost is my good buddy, Stephen Ladd, who I met while working in Hollywood. He is a former screenwriter and novelist and all-around nice guy. Steve, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and what makes you qualified to talk about the Book of Boba Fett?
Thanks, Matt. I was at USC Film for a good 4 years. Learned a lot about breaking down films and writing itself, and then spent the next 20 some odd years in Hollywood applying my craft, working as a writer and then also as a script doctor. And so, I spent a lot of time behind the screen typing and a lot of time breaking down and analyzing stories. So, it landed me here. And, everything that's Star Wars, of course, being a USC grad, it's always dear to my heart. And, some cases, unfortunately, with such as this. Hence, we're here with bad writing. Thanks, Matt.
Yes, no problem. And also with me from my college days is my good friend Chris Bucagnani, who some of you might recognize from our news shows. And basically, Chris is, he's got a very interesting background. He went to film school, he went to journalism school, he's a radio broadcaster, he's a podcaster, but he's also one of the most knowledgeable people about Star Wars that I personally know. Just don't ask him what color Yoda is or he will lose his shit. Chris, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, of course, that dates back to the only time we all played Star Wars Trivial Pursuit.
The last time. Only and last time.
Yeah. But first and last, my final question, to which I still do not know the answer, is what actress played Aunt Beru? I don't know. Who gives a crap? And my roommate got what color is Yoda? And he won. So... yeah, always the bridesmaid when it comes to Star Wars Trivial Pursuit. Anyway, I spend most of my professional time writing and speaking about college football, specifically Penn State, as Matt mentioned, on podcast, radio, television, all over the place. But I've got plenty of other interests, one of them being pop culture and Star Wars. And most of my audience does not give a crap or want to hear it. So every once in a while, Matt indulges me and lets me come over here and have a little imposter syndrome and pretend like I belong on a panel like this one. So looking forward to it.
And with us today is also the award-winning science fiction author, Richard Fox. You might know him from his books, The Exiled Fleet and The Ember War. Richard, why don't you brag a little bit about how awesome you are at writing?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me back, Matt. Appreciate it. I am the author of 45-plus science fiction novels. I've kind of lost count along the way, and I won the Dragon Award for Best Military Science Fiction Novel. And I was real happy for readers to give me that award. And I have been a fan of Star Wars since before I could walk. So one of my earliest memories is my mother carrying me on her hip in 1979 into the movie theater to see Star Wars when it was re-released. So it's I do love Star Wars. I do love science fiction. I've spent an awful lot of time writing books. So let's hope I can get a little more value, bring some value here to this discussion.
And speaking of books, you've actually got a Kickstarter going for a new novel that you're working on. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about that?
That's right. I've got a Kickstarter going right now for the graphic novel of the second book of my Ember Wars series called Ruins of Athlos. And we have artists who have worked on Marvel Comics and DC Comics who are doing this project. And it's co-written along with John Delaroz, who has just kind of an expert of crowdfunding and producing comic books. And it is the second book in the series. But if you bag it, you can read the first graphic novel for free. Our links are in the Kickstarter. And then there's also options for you to get paperbacks and hardcovers of both books. So if you're not familiar with the Ember War, that's no problem because you can just jump right in and get both books at the same time. So
that's awesome.
So we put a link. Take a look at that Kickstarter. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we put a link to your Kickstarter in the chat. We're also going to be putting it in the description of this video. So if you're watching this on replay, check out the description and see where you can go find Richard's Kickstarter. Real quick, before we get going, I just want to remind everyone that we do monitor the chat during these live streams, and we love getting feedback from you guys, questions as we bring things up that you want to know more about. And I just want to really quickly acknowledge some of the people in the chat. Zach's, good to see you, buddy. Richard Lawson, good to see you. PJO, Jamie Vanderhorst, good to see you, Jamie, as always. And Andre Anderson. You guys, thank you all for being here tonight and for participating. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go around my panel, and I want to get just your general sense of what you thought of all 7 episodes, the first season or only season of the Book of Boba Fett, just in general, your take on it, whether you liked it or not, and if not, why, and so on and so forth. So Richard, why don't we start with you? What was your impression of season 1 of the Book of Boba Fett, and did you like it or not?
In a word, meh. It was one big meh for me. It was, I think that Boba Fett sort of sleptwalked through the entire series. He was not the most interesting parts ever.
Like a bantha.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of the stuff that did happen didn't quite seem consistent with other things that we've seen. And a lot of times I was sitting there thinking, like, who wrote this? Did they just like, this is like the worst fanfic ever put to screen?
Well, that was the sequel trilogy, really.
But even this, I mean, I feel like if you went and just grabbed people who really love Boba Fett and grabbed their ideas for what would have how he would have gotten over the Sarlacc pit and what he would have done next, would have been a lot better than this. So, I had some hopes, but it turned out to be just a big old meh.
All right, Stephen Ladd, why don't you give us your impressions on the Book of Boba Fett?
Yeah, a lot of the same. Moments of great wonder mixed in with a whole lot of disappointment. It's, I spoke to you earlier. There's all this stuff that happened. It was like I wanted to hit the brakes and say, no, you just didn't do that to Boba Fett, and ruined basically who he was. It was painful, although I kept watching and hoping that it would develop further into something, and it just really was like, okay, God, you guys did so great with the Mandalorian, and then you come out with this. So yeah, just bummed out.
All right, real quick, want to welcome Aaron Kinney, Eric Falconer, and Rogue Disney to the chat. Thank you guys for tuning in tonight. Really appreciate it. Chris, I know you have a lot to say, so why don't you go ahead and say it?
Well, right off the top, Matt, I do want to just blanket about the discourse around Star Wars, especially online. I really do not like gatekeeping. There are a lot of different ways now to enjoy Star Wars, and God knows there's a lot of Star Wars to enjoy. So however you enjoy it, whatever gets you through the night, that's cool, and it's okay with me. I think disagreement is fine. If I have an opinion of something, it's not me passing judgment on the way you find joy in something that exists to entertain us. My personal perspective on Star Wars, and this is just me, is that, as you know, Matt, I am very skeptical of the notion that Star Wars is this vast, rich universe full of potential for untold stories. I think it's actually the appeal of it, its core appeal, especially for an audience beyond a niche one, is actually very narrow, and it has this effect where the more of it we create, the smaller it feels. And so I sensed some of that in Book of Boba Fett. Whether you agree with that or not, my general takeaway from it was that I did not dislike it. It brought me some happiness at various points. Clearly, there is a spirit of playing with Kenner action figures in the way Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau create Star Wars content, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. But ultimately, I just found it to be underwhelming. I thought it was uneven and disjointed, and that's my ultimate takeaway. Like, it didn't make me feel bad, which is more than I can say, a lot more than I can say for some other things that have been put out under the IP since Disney acquired it. But from a narrative perspective, it was all over the place, and it felt a little shallow to me.
So I think I'm kind of in the minority in the sense that I actually enjoyed the Book of Boba Fett. That does not mean I think it's a good show, but I found it enjoyable. And that's one of the things that it's kind of weird talking about bad writing in the sense that we as craftsmen and people who have worked in storytelling and in some cases who make our livings telling stories, like we can look at this show and be like, point out every single thing that's wrong with it. And objectively, we'd be correct. But there's always that subjective notion there where like people are watching it, it's like, I don't understand why you'd criticize this. This is fun. This is good, blah, blah, blah. So I actually, in fact, a lot of people have been kind of poo-pooing on the finale, but I thought the finale was a lot of fun, personally. Doesn't mean I thought it was good, but I thought it was a lot of fun. So overall, like my impression of the Book of Boba Fett, and I think I've kind of given up on Star Wars after The Last Jedi came out. So like I'm not as like fervent in my, like why did they do this type thing? And because of that, I'm kind of like more open to the bad storytelling that we continuously get from Lucasfilm. And I just kind of like take it for what it is. But tonight, what I plan to do is I really plan to break this series down and kind of inform people what the issues with the show were from a kind of cold calculating storytelling perspective. and kind of leave all like the like, oh, I wish they would have done this instead of this kind of like to the side, because subjectively there are people out there who are going to like this show, but objectively there are major problems with the narrative that this show followed. And the first thing that I want to talk about is the bifurcated season. Now I know that that's a $20 word right there, but it basically means that like it's like it was cut in half, and it feels like there are two separate shows going on in this one season. So it's a 7-episode series, right? And the first 4 episodes focused on Boba Fett. And even those first 4 episodes were bifurcated because half the story was told in flashback about what happened from the point that he escaped the Sarlacc to the point that we saw him show up in Mandalorian season 2. And then there's the stuff that's going on in the current timeline where he's taken over Jabba's territory and he's trying to become this crime lord. And then for 2 episodes, it diverts into Mandalorian season 3. And then the final episode, you could say, is more of Mandalorian season 3, but it kind of like merges the 2 stories together. And for the episodes 5 and 6, Boba Fett was basically like non-existent. Like I think he showed up once in episode 6 for like one scene where he said like one word maybe. But it was kind of weird that they diverted completely away from telling his story for 2 whole episodes to revisit a character that is in a completely different series, basically. So what I wanted to talk to you guys about is what did you think of this creative decision to basically sidetrack the entire series away from its main character for 2 whole episodes? Did it work? What did you think the motivations behind it were? And what do you think could have been done better? So Steve, why don't we start with you?
Oh, well, I think the first you have to take a look at the creative decision making. I feel like they were hitting a lot of these things on the fly almost. It's like, okay, this didn't work, so let's shift the focus over here. They ran Boba Fett kind of into not into a corner, but they drastically changed who he was from what we knew, and drained him of all the mystique. That's what made him so incredible in the first in the original series. It was like this guy who, Darth Vader didn't. He said, "What about me?" And Darth Vader didn't force choke him and said, "Get out of here," or kill him. And he gave him respect. There was something about him, and he went into the Sarlacc, and then when he came out, he wasn't really the same. So they tried to build this story about the Sand People and his relationship, while sacrificing that mystique. The helmet's off. We know who he is. We have all these ideas. And then all of a sudden, it's just kind of narrowed down into one tiny little storyline that, frankly, wasn't, like you said, Matt, it was fun. There were moments that were wonderful in this story, moments of just sheer joy. But when they did that, it just kind of like, okay, we're here. We've got to do something to wrap this into a tight little ball. And, honestly, that whole Sand People thing could have been 1 episode. That's all they needed to really do that. And they didn't have to sacrifice who he was. This whole noble, honorable hero. It's like, no, it's Boba Fett. I mean, he just, screw you. I'm going to kick your ass and fight my way out of this. And he had been that way through the Legends, a lot of the Legends stuff. And he went into that corner, and so I feel like they almost panicked and had to pull him out and use Jin to do it. And that became a part of the problem, because suddenly we're like, okay, is this Book of Boba Fett the Mandalorian with a little bracket Book of Boba Fett? They didn't say that, so it was a little. It just added to the disappointment to me.
Yeah, like I think they might have saved themselves a lot of trouble if they had said the Mandalorian underscore the Book of Boba Fett.
Right, exactly.
Richard, what did you think of the division of the season? 4 episodes and then 3 episodes of something completely different, it seems.
Yeah, it was a little kind of puzzling why they even bothered to do that. And whenever you have a double timeline going on, I'm always of the opinion that if you know what happens in the previous timeline, that ends up having 0 tension. So because we saw Mandalorian season 2, we know Boba Fett. We knew he was with Sand People. He finally gets his armor back, but that's his story. But when you cut back to him climbing out of the Sarlacc pit and then doing his dances with wolves sort of thing with the Tuskens for 2 episodes, it doesn't really matter because we all know where he goes next. So all that kind of felt like just plotting. You're just pacing because it seemed like there just wasn't enough of a story for Boba Fett to have 7 whole episodes.
Yeah.
It's like the guy here, well, what do you want him to do? We want to do this, that, and the other thing. Like, well, that's 3 hours max of film. I'm like, well, we got this budget for 8 hours. What do we do? Oh, well. And then I guess Dave Filoni said, well, I guess we could do some more Mando stuff because everyone's going to like that. And, so I didn't quite understand, if you don't have enough story for a season, then just don't make the story. Don't make the series. Just have like a little Boba Fett sort of mini series and have it be like 2 or 3 episodes and then be done with it. It just, why you're going to go 7 whole episodes of not a lot enough story. I was surprised by that. And then at the beginning of the series, when he's playing Jabba's spot, I never understood why Boba Fett wanted to be a crime lord. For the first several episodes, I'm like, why is he doing this? Because it was wholly at odds with who he was before, because he was a bounty hunter. He wasn't the boss. He wasn't ever trying to be the boss. And now he gets his arms back and goes over, shoots the one tailhead, and then now he's in charge. And it's kind of like, but why? And it took a long time before he finally said, Boba Fett said, oh, I don't want people like us to be, working for people who are just going to throw our lives away. It's kind of like, I feel like Boba Fett. And then like his very last line of the whole season was, I don't think I'm cut out for this. I'm like, you didn't think of this before? You went through all this trouble, and now you get to the end, you're like, maybe I don't want to do this. Just kind of like, come on, man. And then, but as far as establishing who Boba Fett was and who our expectation was, there's an author named Aaron Dembski Bowden, and back in 2016, he made this great blog post about why Boba Fett was such a badass with his minimal screen time. And Steve talked a little bit about that, about how Vader gave him deference. And Matt, I don't know if you can share that. You can share that link for people, but if it's really good read, it's a really good understanding of how an author who I think is one of the best out there, understood Boba Fett's character very well.
Yeah, what's interesting is that Steve kind of mentioned that you could have packaged all the flashbacks into like one episode and then you'd be off the ground running. And I would even say that it might have worked better had they just implied what had happened. Kind of like how, in A New Hope, where, Luke says, you fought in the Clone Wars with my father, like that one line was all the explanation we got for the Clone Wars in the original trilogy. And that was all that we really needed, so like, I feel like the interesting part about the first 4 episodes was the criminal underworld on Tatooine and how Boba Fett was trying to navigate it. And every time we flash back to the Tuskens, I was like, I just don't care. I don't care about this story. And so like, if they had kind of just like left it a little bit to the imagination, like if they pulled a Snake Plissken and every time someone bumped into Boba Fett and they were like, I thought you were dead. How did you escape the Sarlacc pit? And he just had a different explanation every time. That would have been kind of fun, right? Like he pulls a little Joker thing. It's like, oh, it burnt me up, or, I used my jetpack, or like whatever. So like, I think that might have been a little bit more interesting. Chris, what do you think about the bifurcated season here?
And when he delivered those explanations, he should have had the helmet on.
Yes.
Right.
He had his helmet off way too much in this show.
Way too much. And I think I read somewhere where Tamir Morrison was actually concerned about that. He felt they were depriving the character of his mystique, and part of it was the helmet was off way too much. So I think even he was sensitive to that. It didn't really work for me. I maybe could go the other way. I didn't dislike the Tusken storyline quite as much as you did, Matt, or maybe some other folks did. I think it probably could have been presented chronologically if you were going to tell the story that way. And if you were going to use a flashback structure, I almost felt like this story needed a few more episodes. And you could have given some more depth by going back to the history of Boba Fett. One of the things that I think is, again, a little problematic, the more and more Star Wars content you create, the more and more it all relies on each other. And so once you got to the standoff between Boba Fett and Cad Bane, You had to have seen those animatics from an unproduced Clone Wars episode and understand that at one point someone was going to tell a story on a TV show that you may or may not have watched, but whether you did or not, it didn't matter because the episode didn't get made, where these two characters had a history. And so maybe if we could have seen a little bit more of badass Boba Fett, including maybe being put in some really bad situations by stupid employers, to give the rationale for wanting to be a better crime lord than what he had worked through part of his career, that would have been useful. In general, when I think about this, I have a divider that is impenetrable up in my head. And on one side of it is the untouched original trilogy that existed before the special editions came out. And in that, Boba Fett is cool because of his mystique. And the minute you narrow down the limitless possibilities of who he is to he's the cloned son of Jango Fett, a lot of that goes out the window. So Filoni's storytelling, going all the way back to Clone Wars, has been his ability to appreciate and I think idolize George Lucas, but at the same time understand his excesses and failings and try to add some more depth and appeal to George Lucas's Star Wars. So this is always going to be handicapped by the fact that I don't know that the Jango Fett backstory of Boba Fett is particularly compelling, but Filoni is committed to, doubling and tripling down on at least the cohesion of the 6 Lucas Star Wars movies. So, as I said before, I don't know that we definitely didn't need backstory on Han Solo, and I don't think that we really needed it on Boba Fett either. But I think these guys have said it very well about how you could have been more efficient with teasing out his motivation and maybe giving the audience a little bit more compelling story at the same time.
Real quick, we got a $5 super chat from Andre Anderson, and he says, like a bantha, like a bantha. Thank you for that $5, Andre. Really appreciate it. So one of the things that Richard mentioned that I kind of wanted to touch on that goes with the bifurcated season is the pacing issues that created. And, one of the kind of things that as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, as an editor, like what have you, a big part of the audience having a good experience in enjoying a story is pacing it correctly. Now, if something's too slow of a pace, people get bored, they get restless. If something's too fast paced, it can be overwhelming for an audience. So trying to hit that right kind of like pacing for your story is really good. And it's very, it's a tightrope act. And one of the issues with this show was that for the first 4 episodes, every time they'd go to a flashback, it felt like the pacing would just grind to a halt. And cutting back and forth between like the flashbacks and what's going on currently just didn't work in my opinion. Like it really interrupted the pacing. And then for episodes 5 and 6, where you're going off on basically a side quest with a side character for the season, completely derailed the storyline that they had built up to that point. It might have been better if they had weaved the Mandalorian stuff in with the Book of Boba Fett stuff instead of doing the flashback. So we were getting 2 simultaneous stories that kind of led up to intersecting and eventually paying off in the finale. Richard, what do you think of that idea? Could that have been something that Jon Favreau might have considered as opposed to what we ended up getting?
Yeah, I don't know why we had so much flashback. And I'm always of the opinion that if the Steve and Matt, I think both of you probably know who said this, but there's some famous screenwriter out there who said if you're telling the audience something that they already know, that's like a cardinal sin. Because if they already know what happened, then if you tell them again, you're just boring the audience. But Matt, I think that's why you felt like the flashbacks were so slow, because you knew, he's with the Tuskens. Well, we know he's going to get out of the Tuskens. We've seen him before without the Tuskens, so we know something happens to them, and we all know that at the end he's eventually going to take over Jabba's palace. So every time we went back to the flashback sequence, it was just boring because we know. I mean, the one big question was, well, how does he get out of the Sarlacc? And we got that answered pretty quick. And then also later on when he's going back to try to find his armor in the Sarlacc, the audience knows where the armor is. I mean, the audience saw it taken off of him by the Jawas, and somehow he forgot about this. But so, like, when he's there messing around with the Sarlacc again, it's like, what's the point? We know there's nothing in there, Boba. Go do something else more interesting. So every time we got to those flashbacks of something the audience already knows, it was just boring, in my opinion. And as far as weaving in the Mandalorian stuff, I don't know why it had to be there at all, because you could have just had, those 2 Mandalorian episodes be part of Mando season 3, and then of course then it messes up having Mando and Boba Fett there fighting together, which I think is what a lot of people wanted to see in the finale. So I think they just really wanted to have Mando and Boba fighting, beside each other one more time, and they just pulled in a lot of extra Mandalorian because of that.
Yeah, Steve, do you think this might have worked better if it was like Mandalorian season 3 and we had parallel storylines between Boba Fett on Tatooine and whatever his name, the Mando, I can't even pronounce it, Din Djarin. Din Djarin. Why do they put D's in there? But having Boba Fett on Tatooine and Mando kind of off, doing his bounty hunter thing and looking for Grogu again. Do you think it would have worked better if they had just been parallel storylines throughout a 6 or 7 episode season?
Well, sure. I think it absolutely would have worked better. I think it's funny. I mean, each one of you guys has said something that would have actually worked much better. And this right here is one of them. I think when you interweave a story like that, you can stretch the story. And I think that's a critical point because, yeah, if you're pacing it correctly, as you said earlier, Matt, you can pop it in here and then a little detailed scene, but you don't keep going with him and, out, playing with the sand people, doing all, helping the little kid cut the head off that big thing. That just dragged. And so if you're intercutting, at least you can move back and forth between the storylines. It gives the viewer a psychological break, which would help immensely. I think in the end, if they needed, actually more story of Boba Fett. I think that was Richard hit on that, and Chris kind of is aiming towards that too. I think it was more was needed, more content, and I'm not going to get into his development yet, but it seemed like they tried to develop something that A, wasn't necessary, B, destroyed the character. So yeah, I think it would have helped, but I think they would what would help even more is if they really went back and reconsidered what they're turning this guy into.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a little bit about characterization. Chris, real quick, I'm a fan of Jon Favreau. I think he's a great writer. I think he's a great director. I think he's a great producer. I like most of his stuff. I've been a fan of his since Swingers came out, and I love seeing like how far he's come in the industry. So I feel kind of weird critiquing his stuff because like I know that this guy knows what he's doing. And when I see something like Book of Boba Fett, I'm just flabbergasted at like why he can't, actually like see the Matrix like we can, like how can he look at his own writing and be like, I don't know if this is going to work or not. Do you think that he was unduly influenced by outside sources in the making of this, where they were putting pressure on him to do things a certain way, and maybe he just went along to get along?
Yeah, I think that's possible. I mean, look, one of my many, regrets of what could, Star Wars, quote unquote, has become, and I think it's becoming increasingly difficult to even like operationally define what that is so you can have an intelligent conversation about it, is that it has been the fan base has become so balkanized by, whatever, everything from national politics to online internet fan politics. And clearly behind the scenes, internal corporate Hollywood politics is exerting influence on the content we are getting. So I suspect that all of those factors contributed here in one way or another. But to me, this mostly felt like just probably something that turned into a little bit of a quagmire for them, where they committed to producing this show on a certain timeline. And there's a lot of moving parts to making a show like this, including a lot of really expensive special effects and tech. And if you don't get the story right and it's not working, you can really find yourself sinking in the quicksand relatively quickly. And that's what this had the feel of to me, that whatever they were shooting for initially, they went wide of the target and then just increasingly started casting around because eventually they had to get something out to hit the deadline and satisfy the promise they had made that this show was going to premiere on Disney Plus at whatever time. I mean, if you go back and you look at it, 7 episodes, really only 4 of them are story about Boba Fett. Because I agree, there were fun parts of the last episode, but I got bored because to me it just felt like an hour of pew pew pew. Like I didn't think there was a lot of story to it at all.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting because it feels like this season was thrown together at the last minute. I feel like the firing of Gina Carano and the behind the scenes issues with Pedro Pascal might have delayed the season 3 of the Mando. And so like they needed to get something out in 2020, 2021. And so like they were kind of rushed to throw this together. And I think that was a big part of Robert Rodriguez's involvement. Is he's known for being like a very fast producer guy. Like he's down and dirty. He'll get tons of stuff shot in one day. So like I feel like they brought him on because it's like, look, dude, like we need help. We need to churn out like 7 episodes this year, and plus all the COVID restrictions and all that stuff.
Right.
So this almost felt like a stopgap type thing where like it wasn't really planned. And they were just kind of making it up as they went. Yeah. But at the same time, like I feel like a talented storyteller could make something up as he goes and still kind of like come up with something that makes sense. So one of my biggest issues with the Book of Boba Fett was the lack of emotional stakes, especially in the climax where you have Boba Fett going up against Cad Bane. So I'm not someone who's watched the Clone Wars cartoon shows. I know about Cad Bane kind of tangentially. Like I've heard of him. I know that he fought Obi-Wan a lot. I know that he was a bounty hunter who could go toe-to-toe with Jedi. And I know that he was like a real badass, but I don't know anything about his history or anything beyond that because I never watched the Clone Wars. So when he showed up in episode 6, I was like, if I didn't know who this character was, if I was just a casual Star Wars viewer like most people are, I'd have no context for like when he lifts his eyes, you're like, oh shit, that's Cad Bane. It's like most people, I think, were just like, who's this guy? And then like when you have the final confrontation between him and Boba Fett, because we don't know anything about this character, the emotional payoff, it just isn't there. And I feel like the lack of setup for Cad Bane was a big problem with this series. It almost feels like he was tacked on at the end because they needed some type of antagonist for Boba Fett to go up against. So I feel like it would have been more interesting had they woven Cad Bane in from the first episode onward, have him be like the Pike Syndicate's man on the ground in Tatooine. Would have been interesting if he had been the one who had led the slaughter of Boba Fett's Tusken adopted family. And like had that been revealed and actually had some meaning where like I'm facing down the guy who basically killed my family and he's way better than I am at killing and stuff like that, then the stakes would have been risen. It would have been a meaningful showdown. It would have been something that I think the audience could have grasped onto if Cad Bane had been the antagonist for this entire season. Instead, he comes in the final scene of the penultimate episode. He's in 2 scenes of the finale, and then he dies. And he got
maybe. Well, no one's ever really gone mad.
The thing about this is that this is a guy who's gone toe to toe with Jedi and not died, and he succumbs to Tusken Raider style stick fighting. I don't know if I buy that, but let's talk about. Do you guys think that the emotional stakes could have been upped better? Like what would you have done had you been kind of working on this? Chris, let's get your thoughts.
Yeah. there's going to be a scene to open the Book of Boba Fett season 2 where they're going to get Oscar Isaacs to say somehow Cad Bane returned. So I'll say right out of the gate, I came late to the game on Clone Wars and as something of a skeptic and was totally converted. I did really, really enjoy that story. I thought it was great Star Wars storytelling, and I therefore was super excited when Ahsoka Tano showed up in the second season of Mandalorian. I thought it was cool to see Cad Bane. But to Matt's point, I represent the minority. Most of the people watching this show probably had never heard of that character until he showed up in the 6th episode of the series. So, yeah, I think establishing him earlier on, and you hit on a bigger point, Matt, that I didn't feel like there was a whole lot of emotional weight to it being revealed to Boba Fett that the Tuskens were slaughtered by the Pike Syndicate. Everything felt so damn disjointed, partially because of jumping from the present timeline to the flashbacks to the Mandalorian to back to the present timeline. Nothing got a whole lot of time to breathe. There was no oomph for me there. I didn't feel it. I didn't feel like the character felt it. I didn't think like there was any motivation for revenge or even reaction. And so applying that to Cad Bane for sure, I think would have been fine. But look, if I can geek out for a second, what I would like to see in the future is if they're going to do more Boba Fett stories, I would love to see them go 100% campy with it. Not 100% campy, but give me an Expendables story with Boba Fett and all the other bounty hunters from the Executor and the Empire Strikes Back, and set Cad Bane up to be the antagonist of that series. So establish him as a badass threat who is the equal or superior to Boba Fett in this series for those who don't know him from the Clone Wars or Rebels or Bad Batch. And if you do, great, it's just bonus. But then carry him forward as an antagonist to Boba Fett for future shows.
So, Richard, one of the interesting things that I noticed in the finale is they kind of hinted that Cad Bane and Boba Fett had a history with one another, and Cad Bane was almost like a mentor to him, where he would teach him lessons, or he kind of took over his training to a certain extent. And that kind of surrogate father relationship is something that's very powerful to play with, especially in cases where the surrogate son and father are at odds with one another. And I think that had they explored that more throughout the series, where maybe some of those flashbacks were with, a young Boba Fett, being tutored by Cad Bane, then this final showdown at the end would have carried so much more weight to it. Being an award-winning science fiction author, how would you have structured this type of thing to have actually given the audience some type of big emotional payoff at the end of the series?
Well, as a writer, and if I had Boba Fett, I would first give him, something to care about. Because as I was talking about earlier, when he, throughout most of the series, I didn't know what he wanted and why he wanted it. So I was kind of like, what's he even doing throughout most of this time? But I never watched the Clone Wars. Sorry, because my thought was it's all prequel. I know what happens. It doesn't. It can't really change anything in the Clone Wars series that's going to be different from Episode 3. So I did not have a whole lot of interest in it. So I knew who Cad Bane was a little bit, and when he started showing up, I'm like, this guy's really cool. I like him. I would have seen a lot more. And Matt, your idea, and Chris, your idea for having, for them to have had a series or a pass together, yeah, that would have actually paid off and given some sort of narrative thread to follow throughout the entire series. But we didn't even get that. And I was hoping that maybe we would see Boba Fett doing something with old clone soldiers, because think about it, they're all him. They're all Tamara Morrison. So you could have had him running around with, then here comes the people from the Bad Batch. And here comes some characters from the Clone Wars, and it's him dealing with being the true son or not true son, or just him having to this identity crisis of who am I really after he climbs out of the Sarlacc pit, and then he comes across a bunch of old clone troopers who look just like him, and who are all like, wait a minute. I thought that kind of story would have been really interesting, because it would have introduced an element that we hadn't explored, but now we just had, Boba wants to be a crime boss. Why? Because it's cool. All right, okay. And then off we went. So there was not a lot of emotional stakes in the whole series.
So, Steve, one of the things that you can really judge a story by is how good the antagonist is. And when I mean antagonist, it's a fancy word for bad guy. He's the guy who is the obstacle to the hero or the protagonist. And, in Mandalorian, we had Moff Gideon, and he was like the big bad of the first 2 seasons. And so Mando had someone that he would, be struggling against. I mean, he'd fight, depending on the episode, he'd fight lower level side bosses, but Moff Gideon was always that ever-present threat there. And with Book of Boba Fett, I feel like it was missing an antagonist up until, Cad Bane showed up. So first of all, you have the nebulous biker gangs on the sands of Tatooine who supposedly slaughtered his Tusken family. You have the Pike Syndicate, who don't really seem to be, that big of a threat because we never get to know the person running it. It's just some random guy. You have the mayor, but he's a politician, so he doesn't really give that direct threat. I think the closest that we got to a direct antagonist to Boba Fett was maybe Black Chrysanthemum. Is that his name? Chrysanthemum. And he only fought Boba Fett once before he kind of won him over to his side. So the lack of a very clear and strong antagonist in this show, I felt kind of contributed to the meandering aspect to it, feeling like it was a little bit unfocused because Boba Fett really had no one that he was struggling against. How do you think this show could have set up a more direct antagonist to Boba Fett, and what would that have brought to the story?
Well, the first thing I would have done is the final scene in episode 6, where he shoots
Cobb Vanth.
Yeah, Cobb Vanth. You put that take that right up and put that as the very first scene of the story, the series, right there. That would have set us up. We know who Cobb Vanth is. We know who Freetown. We know about Freetown. That whole thing is set up so it's okay, this guy came in and just shot one of our favorite characters. So it establishes so much about him. I mean, his entrance was stuff of legend, I thought. I mean, that's like Old West, good, bad, the ugly type, spaghetti Western stuff. He's sitting there with the brimmed hat, the snarl, the
And I love how the deputy kept coming out and Cobb Vanth was just like, dude, you idiot, get back inside.
One thing about that deputy is that every time when he came out, he still had the snap over his pistol.
Yeah.
If you remember that. And I haven't been in many gunfights, but if you think you're about to shoot somebody, you probably want to have that off. And I'm sorry.
I think he was overconfident in Cobb Vanth type thing. Yeah. But that whole scene was just hilarious. I felt like I was watching Justified Tatooine edition.
That's great.
Yeah. And I love Timothy Olyphant. In fact, for those of you who didn't watch to the end credits scene, they showed that Cobb Vanth was in the Bacta tank at Jabba's palace.
Okay.
And the mod doctor played by that Thundercat guy who saved Fennec Shand, he's there. So they're going to be bringing back Cobb Vanth at a certain point in time. But yeah, Steve, I think you're right. If they had moved that scene up to the first scene that we get in the series, establishing Cad Bane as an actual threat, that might have worked better.
Well, yeah, you take it, you establish a bad guy, a good antagonist, and it could also change the feel. I mean, that guy walked out of a spaghetti Western and just happens to be, I'd always heard Star Wars referred to as either a space opera or a space Western. That fits the bill right there. And then you have these two outlaw types and focus the story, have an interaction, maybe not even direct interaction between it's all built up to this final gunfight. That would give it pertinence, and you would have everything built up instead of 4 some odd episodes of these flashbacks. So the question I kept coming in my head was, where are we going with this? And it's Richard and Chris both mentioned that it's just give me some direction, give the character some direction. He was meandering. I get it. I get the whole Western drifter thing, but that really wasn't how it came across. It came across as, we don't know exactly what to do yet, but we'll figure it out by the end of the series.
It's true. Real quick, we got a super sticker from Mark Burns for $2.99. Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate that super sticker very much. So let's talk about some of the plot inconsistencies in this show, because there were a lot of plot logic inconsistencies that I really want to touch on here. The first one, and this is one that's kind of been making the rounds, is that in this epic showdown, right? Real quick before we get to this, I just want to mention that when they introduced the two huts, I thought that those were going to be the big bads, right? Like I would have loved to have seen like the criminal masterminds working behind the scenes to, undermine Boba Fett and stuff like that. And then like they just fuck off after one episode, and they're like, "Here's your Rancor. See you later." I felt like the Pike Syndicate was a very poor big bad for the season.
Hey Matt, just real quickly, I just want to say, because I the whole stream has kind of a negative feel to it, right? Because we're talking about the writing, which was clearly not the strong suit of this show. But it's worth noting that none of us hated it. I don't even think any of us disliked it, right? Like the one thing I have got to give credit to is that the writing was not great. Like I said, I felt very uneven and all over the place. But it also felt like it was made, imperfectly or no, with a genuine affection for the property and respect for the fans and a desire to give us something that was going to make us happy, which again goes a long way with me in the era of corporate Star Wars. And what made me think of that was, it's been making the rounds. There are so many nice little nods to the world building, the animals that the huts are eating. I don't even know if any of you guys will know what these are. They were hoojibs. Does that mean anything? Do any of you? Okay, Google it. Hoojibs. I very fondly remember wearing out my cassette tape storybook, The Planet of the Hoojibs, where Chewbacca and Princess Leia went to this planet with all these little white rabbit mouse creatures, and those are the animals that one of the Hutt twins is wiping the sweat off himself with before he eats it. Incredible little nod. So they did not make contact with this one for sure, but I really deeply appreciate the genuineness with which they stepped to the plate and took the swing.
Well, Chris, I'm going to have to insist you stop being positive for the rest of the stream.
I promise. That's it.
We are talking Star Wars. We have to be salty. And speaking of which, $20 super chat from Aaron Kinney. Thank you so much. He says, "Love you, salty nerds." We love you too, Aaron. Thank you for that $20. That is much appreciated. All right, so getting back to the plot logic inconsistencies here. So
now let's rip this thing to shreds.
Yes, let's toss all decorum aside. So the big thing was that when Boba Fett ran off to go get the Rancor in the finale, a lot of people are like, "Hey, dude, you have a fire spray in your garage. Why not get into your gunship and frickin' lay waste to all the people trying to shoot your people?" Because that thing can hover, it's not just something that flies around. So, guys, why didn't Boba Fett get Slave One, and I am calling it Slave One, not the fire spray, to basically help out in the finale of this? Like, he could have at least parked it and let Din Djarin with 2Ds go and fly it for him or something like that. Steve, why not get the fire spray or Slave One?
Hey, that's a great question. I think a lot of it was how cool was it to see the Rancor come up over like a horror film, or a some monster movie, and then there he is. It's like, oh, that was awesome. I think it was sacrificed for an awesome moment, but it does make a lot of sense. And you could still even do it. He could, that thing was on autopilot, and when it got blown, was it when Jen's ship got blown up? It's like they rode the Slave One. He can put it up there and have that thing firing, or put someone. I mean, he's got a Wookiee, and we know Wookiees are pretty damn good at flying spaceships by now. Am I right? So you put someone in there that can fire it, Finnick, and just lay waste,
just like an astromech droid or something.
Yeah,
like that.
Exactly. And and not only that, go after the Pike Syndicate ships. Because Lord knows there are probably a bunch of them just hanging out. That's one thing I noticed about all this. They had bad guys just waiting around to be slaughtered. You ever notice that? I mean, all of them in the room. Fennec Shan comes in, it's like a video game. Pop, 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 pop. Okay, done. It's like, one guy gets shot, the rest of them should be hauling ass. That's just my personal opinion.
I mean, the only logical explanation I can think of as to why he chose the Rancor over his gunship is that in order to defeat a shielded robot enemy, you needed something that could grab it and toss it around and get past its shields. Whereas if there was just a line of dialogue that said like, oh, my fire sprays cannons can't penetrate those energy shields, like that would have been enough. But like at the same time, that one ship would have evened out the odds on like the ground level thug aspect of this. But another thing I wanted to ask you guys about, so should when Fennec Shan kind of fucked off in the middle of all the action, she was like, oh, we should go and assassinate the head of the Pike Syndicate and all the leaders, because without their leaders, all these guys will fuck off, right? So Richard, why wasn't that the plan from the beginning when they knew that they couldn't get the muscle? Why not just cut off the heads of all their enemies?
Also, something about me. I'm a former military intelligence officer in the United States Army. I spent 10 years in the Army. I deployed to Iraq twice. And I was kind of amazed that they said, oh, we're going to sit around and wait for them to get all their troops here. And I'm like, what? So they're vulnerable right now. You could go kill them, the leaders, right now, and then meet the ship on the way down and tell them to piss off back into space. So it's like, why didn't they do that? Well, because you don't have a finale. Is basically what it comes down to. Is it like, well, we need explosions, so we're not going to do the smart thing, and so that way we can have our explosions. You know, it goes to pitch meeting where they always, when the producer will make some example, and then the writer says, so that way the movie can happen. Like, oh, okay, why didn't they do that? Well, that way the finale can happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of basics Hollywood, right? Where it's like, well, if this doesn't happen, then we can't have this set piece, and we need the set piece because it's going to be cool, even though it doesn't make any sense. Chris, why is Tatooine so important? You are the Star Wars expert on the panel, and I'm wondering what like it almost looked like Tatooine has a thriving tourist business with all like the transports coming and going.
Well, you rode Star Tours.
Well, but,
it does have a thriving tourism business. I mean, little robot flies you there as part of Star Tours.
Look. Here's the thing: it's a desert planet. It doesn't have any natural resources. It's got way too big of a population for a planet that has nothing on it. What is the appeal? Like, why is Tatooine so important other than being the birthplace of Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker?
Because there aren't many interesting things in Star Wars. It is self-contained to some creative storytellers and filmmakers hitting lightning in a bottle and threading the needle in the perfect time in the American film industry, in the perfect moment in American culture, and the perfect casting to inhabit the roles that were created and gave us something that we all have such a profound social attachment to, that it's become modern mythology. And the way you capitalize on it now is returning to the few things that work. And one of them is Tatooine. That's really what I think. If you disagree, again, I'm not telling you I'm a real fan and you're not. If you missed the beginning of the stream, I loathe gatekeeping. I am just giving my opinion. I think that's why. And if you want to know why he didn't bring the Slave One to the battle, now that fuel is canon in Star Wars, I can only assume that the New Republic, for whatever its virtues, has probably made a complete mess of galactic infrastructure, and I bet gas prices are just through the roof.
Yeah, supply chain issues.
Yeah, he probably just didn't have it fueled up.
Yep. Inflation's out of control.
One thing, if I could add, there is one natural resource that we did see, and that's the spice. That they were trading there, so there's something there that they actually had. Now, I'm not sure. It sounded like it was a very valuable thing, and sadly, it gets really close to stepping on Dune's territory, but that's for another podcast.
Well, the thing about Tatooine, at least in the prequels and the original trilogy, is that it's so far on the outer rim of the galaxy that the Empire didn't really care about it. There wasn't a whole lot of natural resources there or strategic use for the planet. However, the idea that, if they had just had some lines of dialogue where it's like, this is a key smuggling route because it's so far out in the rim that nobody cares about it. So like everything that's smuggled from drugs to slaves to like, whatever has to go through Tatooine. And that's why it's an important strategic hold.
They did kind of imply that at one point, didn't they?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like they give us some background where it's like Tatooine used to be covered by oceans and stuff like that. How a planet orbiting a dual sun was water based, I don't know, but the idea here is that if you're going to make Tatooine the centerpiece of your story, give us a little bit of background as to why it's so important. They're like, why was the Syndicate so big on the spice trade on a planet that probably has like a handful of people who want to do drugs on it? I mean, like it makes sense if like it was the gateway to Coruscant, where you have like literally billions of people that you can like peddle your spice to. And another thing, they didn't even really kind of flesh out what spice is, or like how it's used or anything like that. So like it was lacking on a lot of details as to why this was. And another thing is Jabba's legacy. This is what I want to touch on a little bit. And Richard, feel free to jump in here on this. Jabba was like the big kind of like crime lord. He was like the Al Capone of the original trilogy. Like he was the guy who would hire smugglers to like funnel his ill-gotten gains and stuff like that across Imperial checkpoints and stuff and things of that nature. And once he died, he was basically his stuff was taken over by an ineffective criminal who you would think would have been taken care of long before Boba Fett got there. So what do you think Jabba brought to the table that should have been expounded upon in the story?
Well, Jabba being a Hutt, we could have seen the Hutts getting more involved.
Yeah, because the Hutts have a syndicate, right? They have their own syndicate.
Yeah, well, the Hutt in Chris probably knows this better than I do, but the Hutts are like, they are the mafia throughout all of Star Wars for the most part.
Yeah.
So you had Jabba there, and then he gets killed, and then they let this Twi'lek take over his territory, and then once the Twi'lek's gone, and then Boba's there, and then some more Hutts show up. And I'm like, why didn't the Hutts show up earlier? And then why do the Hutts just decide, nah, it's too much trouble here, have a nice pet Rancor that we're gonna name Chekhov's gun so he can show up later, and then leave again? I mean, Jabba's best thing he could have done was to have brought more Hutts back in there. And at the end of season 2 or episode 2, when there's the two Hutts and Black Chrysanthemum are there, I'm like, this is going to be great. And then at the end of season 3, it's like, no, they all piss off. Well, okay, I guess. It was a big letdown for me. I wanted to see that story aspect. So, yeah.
Yeah, Chris, just tell me why Tatooine's so important in Star Wars. And why was Jabba the Hutt such a big wig?
Oh, well, don't ask questions, Matt. Like when
just consume.
When you first got a look at Jabba the Hutt in Return of the Jedi, you had to ask yourself the question: how did this thing become a crime lord? Like, I'm not even sure how he gets around, right? But he looked cool, and you just rolled with it. And I don't know, man. Like one of the things that I had a problem with in this show is that I felt by the end of it, Boba Fett wasn't really trying to become a crime lord, right? Like he wasn't trying to take over a crime syndicate. He was just basically trying to become like a local regent for Mos Espa and protect that little principality. Like it felt to me more like, when the American colonies rebelled against Great Britain, they didn't want to take over the British Empire. They just wanted to kick the redcoats out and be left alone to do their own thing. And that's really what we had by the end of the show, was a fight for freedom from the spice runners. But it wasn't like Boba Fett trying to take over a criminal empire. So he wasn't trying to take over Jabba the Hutt's territory or his crime operations or anything. He was just trying to be the daimyo of Mos Espa.
Yeah. What gets me about like this criminal story, the criminal underworld, which really is what I wish that this show had kind of expanded upon and given us more insight into the Star Wars criminal underworld and how it works, is that so like you had like 3 or 4 different crime factions operating on Tatooine. And, Boba Fett tried to bring them all under one umbrella to go against the Pike Syndicate. And they were like, oh, no, we're going to do our own thing. and it makes like in traditional mafia, you have like these cultural crime families where you got like the Irish, you got the Italians, like all these other stuff, and they have like their own things going on, and they feud over territory, because the more territory you control, the more avenues you have to basically make money. And with Tatooine, it's obvious that they're trying to do like this Old West type deal where, you got these like frontier towns, and you got like the occasional marshal, and you got all these like crime bosses kind of fighting over stuff. But the thing that gets me is like they really made spice the centerpiece of all the criminal shit that was happening on Tatooine, where you would think that water would be the crux of what's happening on Tatooine, because Stephen Root showed up as like the key moisture dealer on Tatooine, and on a planet where you literally have to have farms to mine moisture out of the atmosphere so that you can sustain life on that planet. You would think that the real valuable thing instead of spice would be water, and these would be like water wars going on for control of like some type of like well or spring or underground river or something, and then that could have led in directly to the benevolence of whoever controls the water. Like are you going to give this to the people so they can survive, or are you going to charge them arm and a leg for it? Steve,
like your Morton Joe.
Yeah. So Steve, what do you think about that? Do you think that going with the spice was the lazy route, or how could they have fleshed out the criminal underworld on Tatooine more to have this story make more sense?
Well, I'm not so sure if the spice was the lazy route, although I think it was what I think is very incomplete. I think you're right. The moisture, having water, I mean, that's elementary. I mean, it just, no pun intended. It's right. It should be there as a center point, because it's overall the lack of resources on this planet. I think that was the bigger issue. And you have one resource that everyone needs versus one resource that's valuable everywhere else but there, and that was the spice. And it's having this fight control, you have several factors working together. You have a smuggler's haven, that idea. You have this idea that there's this lack of resources that people need, and they're barely scraping by with moisture farmers. I think they didn't really show the impact of it. It's just kind of like, okay, here's your moisture farmers. Okay, we got that covered. No, it's like, look, that's not enough. It shouldn't be enough. Or the spice. Okay, we're getting wealth coming in, but they're getting ripped off by whoever's taking it from, or getting a menial price. Kind of like this. How the water trader was. I mean, he was clearly ripping people off. And when the mod squad rebelled against him, I thought, which I thought was a low point of the story. It's like, I swear I heard on their speeder bikes, I could have heard the Monkeys theme song. Yeah, their Vespas, the Monkeys theme song playing. It was just, come on, guys. But with that, I mean, you had a real opportunity, and I think you lost it there. But I think if you broadened it to resources, and that makes for great fodder, because if you're on a planet where there's very little and everyone's having to fight for it, that's instant conflict. So in a sense, yes, it was a lazy route, only because it didn't expand enough.
All right, let's talk a little bit about character arcs, because the biggest thing in any story, in any good narrative, is how characters grow and change, and what they do within that narrative. Now, Richard, before we started this live stream today, you said that you wanted to touch on Grogu and the Mandalorian's character arcs, and how basically you felt the Book of Boba Fett kind of wrecked everything that the first two seasons of The Mandalorian set up. So why don't you take it away on this one? What happened with Grogu and Mando that you disagreed with in the Book of Boba Fett?
So we get to the end of season 2 of The Mandalorian, and Grogu agrees to go off with Luke friggin' Skywalker to go learn the ways of the Jedi, which is kind of, that was Mandalorian's whole reason to be, or everything. He's like, I have to get this child to his own people. That was his goal. So finally, at the end of season 2, he gets Grogu back to the Jedi, and then he's fulfilled whatever sort of Mandalorian code that he's supposed to have fulfilled. And we saw that when he finally caught back up with the other Mandalorians. And so really that character arc was complete. The Mandalorian did what he wanted to do, did something consistent with his character to do, to get Grogu back to his people. And for Mandalorian, that sort of attachment to a foundling, even though he gave up this foundling, that doesn't quite fit. So now all of a sudden he's like this dad. He's like a divorced dad who just wants to go see his kid at kindergarten for some reason. And then Grogu, he sure, he's never said much, but he chose to go with Luke Skywalker to go learn the ways of the Force. And then Grogu, he's like, I'll go back to Mando. I'm going to give up this whole Jedi thing, that he's wanted to do, and he's been, kind of fated to go do. And so really the last episode of Boba Fett undid all the character growth from 2 seasons of Mandalorian. So now we're going to go back to Mando season 3, where it comes back to, Wolf and Cub again, where it's just Mandalorian and Grogu off doing Mandalorian Grogu things. So it's kind of, you had those characters take that big step forward and move ahead, and then now it's like, no, we're going to take a step back because that's just where they think they can find the most drama out of whatever they're going to get in season 3. So I was kind of disappointed that, these characters, they advanced and then like, nah, let's go back to where we were and forget all that other stuff.
Well, one of the things that we should point out is that in episode 6, we got an amazing Luke Skywalker deepfake performance. Like the special effects for young Luke Skywalker were so much better in this episode than they were in the finale of season 2 of The Mandalorian. That Lucasfilm spending money on that YouTube deepfaker really paid off, in my opinion. In fact, I don't know if you guys know this, but all the dialogue was deepfaked as well. Like, that was not Mark Hamill. Right. They actually pulled a lot of his audio from like audiobooks that he's done and created this like AI algorithm that could basically regurgitate, his young voice with any words that they want, which was pretty amazing. But I felt like Luke making an ultimatum where he was like, you can either go with, the Mandalorian or you can stay here and train, was a little bit ham-fisted, especially considering the fact that if Obi-Wan had given Luke that choice, there's no way he'd have chosen to stay with Obi-Wan, in fact, he told Yoda, fuck you, I'm going to go save my friends instead of completing my training. But maybe because of the way that turned out, that might have been why, Luke decided to make that choice. But the thing that bothered me the most, and I understand why they did it, but I felt like the finale of the Book of Boba Fett saw the return of Jake Skywalker. He sends his droid to fly the student of his to Tatooine to fuck off with the guy who delivered it to him. And, you would think that Luke Skywalker would personally deliver Grogu to the Mandalorians to make sure that he got to the guy safely, But instead he's just like, nah, just take my droid and my fighter jet. And once you're on Tatooine, and how he knew the Mandalorian was on Tatooine, I have no idea. But once you're on
the Force, obviously.
Yes.
He just used the Force.
Yes. Once you're on Tatooine, good luck, kid. And see ya, wouldn't want to be ya. So this explains how Grogu survives the purge from the Knights of Ren and stuff like that at Luke's Academy and stuff like that. But I felt like it was a real dick move for Luke just to send him off without personally delivering him. And I understand why they did it, because it was probably too expensive to have Luke in 2 episodes. But I felt like this was a return of Jake Skywalker. Chris, what do you think of this?
That's the same reason why Jon Snow couldn't have his dire wolf at 2 battles in a row, right? Like, we just got to pick one and spend the money on that. Look, the sequel trilogy is going to be a persistent problem for this Favreau-Filoni universe that they are building, and it speaks to the point that I think Richard brought up about when you were doing prequel and you already know how things turn out. It strips it of a lot of the dramatic tension and weight. And what they did with the character of Luke Skywalker, the decision to sort of deconstruct the monomythic trope of Luke Skywalker, that is the moment that, to use your $20 word, Matt, they irreparably bifurcated the fan base of Star Wars and really drained a lot of the unifying power of those stories that they're never going to get that back. They're never going to get that back because going back to my point that there are, I think, a very limited, narrow scope of things that draw people into Star Wars. One of the main ones is Luke Skywalker, and you need look no further than the analytics behind his 2 appearances on these Disney Plus shows, right? Like a heroic portrayal of that character we all love drives mass audiences to Star Wars. And so it was disappointing to me that the decision to kind of create a path for that character post Return of the Jedi, where he seems to have not really learned or evolved beyond where the Jedi were when they fell at the end of episode 3. And he falls into all the same traps and makes all the same mistakes, up to and including not learning from his own journey. Like you said, Matt, telling Obi-Wan and Yoda to kiss off and abandoning his training to go save Han and Leia. That's what Grogu's doing here, right? Like, I think it would have been better if you were going to go down that route, because it's like poetry, it rhymes, to have Grogu sense that Din Djarin was in danger. And that's when he's forced to make the decision. And we'll see what they do down the line. It may be that he comes around and returns to Luke at some point. I don't want to get into any of the questions about how you're going to reconcile these stories with a bunch of movies that most of the audience who likes the TV shows did not care for. But, maybe Luke did learn something from the fact that Obi-Wan and Yoda told him he needed to let Han and Leia die if he honored what they fought for. And he defied them. And even though he was defeated in his standoff with Darth Vader on Cloud City, that set off the chain of events that allowed him to become a Jedi who defeated Palpatine and redeemed his dad. So you would hope the character would have evolved and learned something from that, not just personally as a character, but as the banner bearer for the Jedi Order. That gives him a chance to undo and learn from one of the mistakes that led to their downfall at the rise of the Empire. So it's really ultimately going to be how they contextualize Luke giving him that choice. Did he just make the same dumb mistake? Or was he kind of playing 4D chess here, Jedi mind tricking his own student and leading him to make the choice where the right decision was to go and save his friends, just like Luke did? I don't know. We'll see. But after I spent an hour with pew pew robot fighting, I don't know that I want to spend hours and hours more with this show to figure out the answer.
Yeah. Richard.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Jake Skywalker.
Yeah, from my writer's perspective, the reason why that Grogu got dumped off in the X-Wing was because if Luke Skywalker dropped him off, then Luke Skywalker would be there for the finale. And we already saw Luke Skywalker save everyone's bacon in the end of Mandalorian season 2. So now if he shows up, then you're just repeating that one note, which was cool, but then everyone's going to be like, well, we just saw that. So,
but how great would it have been, because Luke's the one who threw Boba into the Sarlacc. So like, how great would that confrontation have been where Boba's like, I don't want your help. I don't need your help. Get the fuck off my planet. Yeah. Like that might've been like a good emotional payoff at, you'd think. Yeah.
Or you could have had Han Solo drop off Grogu, that would have been kind of fun to see. But yeah. But no, that's I think that's why they did it that way, because otherwise then Luke's there and then he has to play, and everyone's already seen that. So
yeah,
and then if you've got Luke Skywalker there, you don't need Luke Skywalker and the Rancor to beat 2 drones. So let's get the Rancor in there. We haven't seen that yet. So
yeah, Luke is way overpowered. Steve, why was the Pike Syndicate so good at hitting armored portions of very vulnerable people?
Well, they basically are alien versions of stormtroopers, turns out, and so they're gonna miss. And that's the one thing I had a problem with is we've seen these crime syndicates, we've seen Crimson Dawn, we've seen the Hutts, we've seen now Pike Syndicate, and all of them are there, but very few of them are menacing. You know, the Hutts are kind of like, okay, even Jabba in Return of the Jedi, it's like, okay, he's just got numbers on his side, so he's outnumbering them, and Luke had to go in and beat the snot out of him. But at the same time, it's like, okay, they've got numbers on their side, but they didn't really feel like they created a risk, especially like I said at the when all the leaders are sitting in that room waiting to get getting shoot to get turned into a shooting gallery by Finnick Shand. It was like, you guys, make these guys worth something. Make this a real risk. It's like they're fighting impossible odds. Make it feel like it. And that's the problem. It didn't. It bothered me to no end. It's kind of like, all right, these guys look like a rehash. I guess were they the ones in this Han Solo movie? When they were trying to get that ship on the first attempt they made to try to save all that stuff and got foiled by
I don't think so.
biker gang. It's one of the syndicates. Okay, I think that was Crimson Dawn, but they were hitting someone else, and they did mention the Pike Syndicate, I guess. So it's like one of these deals. Like, okay, I see the head of the Crimson Dawn is Darth Maul. Okay, that's great. Like, if he showed up, it would like, okay, yeah, now you've got a real problem. Yeah, you don't have to say anything. We know you have a problem. Even though, he's, halvesies now or whatever, he is still a menace. These guys never seem menacing. They just didn't do anything. And like I said, it's a stormtrooper with a fish face or a, melon head, whatever they're going to show up as.
Chris, one of the big eye roll moments for the finale for me was Black Chrysanthemum basically tanking like a billion different laser blasts.
Yeah.
And like he's got his bandolier on. You see like the lasers like bouncing off his bandolier, but he's getting shot like in the back, left and right. And he just like brushes it off like it's nothing. Meanwhile, like stormtroopers take one hit to their armor.
Dunzo.
Dead. Yeah, Dunzo. So like there's a lot of inconsistency here, especially like considering like do you know, is slavery still legal on Tatooine during this time period? Because it was they had slavery during the Old Republic, and they had slavery during the Empire on Tatooine. Has slavery been abandoned by this point? Because it looked like that Twi'lek bar had like some Twi'lek slaves in it, as sex slaves or like whatever you want to call them. So I'm just wondering like how dark is the underworld of Mos Espa over here?
Well, that's a good question, and you feel like we got no background. That wasn't fleshed out at all. I again, going back to what did this show want to be, and what kind of story did it want to tell, and what were the motivations of its main character? Filoni and Favreau, they understand the DNA of Star Wars, and that's grafting the aesthetic and the monomyth onto other storytelling, narrative tropes, westerns and samurais and mob films, which they all tried to do in some kind of a mishmash in 4.5 episodes plus 2 episodes of The Mandalorian in this 7-episode series. And so like, if you wanted to do The Sopranos in the Star Wars universe, and you also wanted to give it a Western feel, there was no way you were going to accomplish that in basically 4 episodes worth of storytelling. You had to pick one direction and go, or give us at least 10 one-hour episodes. Give us a Game of Thrones season to really do world building and add some weight to it. And so that to me is a compelling notion. I think you're right, Matt. I would have been interested in the galactic underworld story, but I didn't get much of that at all. Like, again, if you think about mob movies, very, very rarely do you just have like a massive 45-minute shootout like this story finished up with. A lot of it is more like we saw the blowing up of the bar in the episode before. It's like tactical hits, it's scare tactics, it's assassinations. And that's all interesting, but you got to take time to set it up and give it some weight. And to that point, I didn't even really feel like a lot of emotional weight to that bar getting blown up. We never really talked about it again.
Yeah, the Jennifer Beals character, like she was kind of like a non-entity. And in typical crime stories where you have Boba Fett trying to be like the crime boss of Mos Espa, his natural antagonist would be someone like Cobb Vanth, like the straight and narrow lawman who's like, this is my town. I'm not going to let you corrupt it and take it over. And so it might have been more interesting to see like that type of dynamic. Richard, the big droideka like gun droids at the end of the finale, like there are two of them that just show up out of nowhere. And Boba Fett had all of his minions kind of looking at the transport ports, the airports and stuff like that, keeping an eye on who's coming and going. You'd think they would have seen those get shipped in. Where did those come from?
Yeah, good question. Probably just some way of raising the stakes. And I was so surprised when all the good guy characters, they just kept shooting and shooting and shooting at the shields, accomplished nothing. And then the shields go down, and they're all like, "Oh, I guess we're done." And I'm sitting like, "You've got guns. The shields are down. Why don't you shoot them now when the bullets will work?" And all the characters are like, "Nope, nope, nope." Just like it was, but I guess but if the shields go down and then they just shoot the robots, then the Rancor doesn't get to tear them apart, which is a lot cooler.
You know what I think they really needed? They needed to recruit some Gungans because they're really good at taking out shields.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That little blue ball thing that they had. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So I want to round up this discussion with probably the most important topic we're going to cover tonight, which is Boba Fett's character arc. Now, one of the weird things about this series is that it seems like they were using it as a way to kind of retcon Boba Fett into a hero as opposed to a villain for whatever reason. And so by the time this series started, Boba Fett was already this kind of noble, good guy. And his motivation for becoming the crime lord or daimyo of Tatooine is quite benevolent. Like he wants to help people. He's like, I'm not running because these are my people and I'm going to protect them from this Pike syndicate type thing, even though he's supposed to be a ruthless crime boss. So like a lot of this stuff doesn't really kind of meld. Like if he had been like, I'm going to become mayor of this town, and I'm going to protect these people, or I'm going to be the marshal, I'm going to be the lawman, that would have made a little bit more sense because he's actually fighting against crime syndicates as the law, protecting the citizens and stuff like that. So if they wanted to kind of, reposition him as a good guy, making him the sheriff of Mos Espa would have made far more sense because then like he would have had motivations to be taken out the syndicate. And because he used to be a scoundrel, a criminal, a bounty hunter, whatever, he'd know all their tricks. And so he'd be very effective at taking them down. And so you would have had a Batman situation where like the criminals are on their heels. They have to band together and bring in like these heavy hitters to kind of take out like this guy who's like the new law in town. So to me, that would have made more sense if they had wanted to reposition his character like this. But as it stands, he's already had his character arc by the time he had shown up at the end of Mandalorian season 2. And so we don't get to go on that journey with him. I think they tried to accomplish that with the flashbacks, but I never understood why he felt kinship to a Tusken tribe that basically enslaved him and didn't let him go until he proved that, he could like beat these weird desert creatures. So like, it seems to me like a lot of the character arc was forced and done so way before the story started. So what I want to ask you guys is how would you have handled Boba Fett's character arc? Steve, let's start with you.
Well, first off, I wouldn't have even gone with this benevolent leader. I would have never touched that. Boba Fett to me, if you go on a scale from villain to hero, at best he would be anti-hero, and I think they kind of ditched that. He kind of fit the mold at the end of the Mandalorian, and then you see him go back and take over. I was fully expecting something different with this series, and for them to go in that direction was extremely tough to swallow. I thought it's like, this is not a nice guy. He put Han Solo in carbonite. He's shot at Luke. There's the whole history of him is not a good guy. And so to make him, when you have an anti-hero as a protagonist, what you have to do is, if he's a bad person, you have to throw someone worse at him. And that's always the key to it. And that's what I would have done. I mean, really amped it up, bring in Cad Bane, raise the stakes, make everyone around him. He's pulling together this really bad situation, and for him to go through this nobility and have this whole thing with the Sand People. It's like, look, they're Tuscans. I mean, I figured they're going to throw him in a pit and have him, basically like a gladiator every night until he walked himself out of there, and they finally like, okay, respect, you earned it. That's more along the lines. Just have him turn tougher and tougher, and be more of a catalyst character. In Star Wars, a good catalyst character is R2D2. R2 never changes. He's the same guy throughout. He just comes in and saves the day every so often. He's lovable, he's sweet, but you never see a character arc. He's the one character in the primary trilogy that never really had an arc. If you think about it, you have our, like C-3PO. There's not much to say. I'm not much of a storyteller to Return of the Jedi, where he's in there telling the Ewoks this wonderful story and they're all gripped by it. R2 didn't have that. I don't think Boba Fett should have had it either. It's more like he changes the people around him, goes in and carves out this whole thing like, hey, I'm here. I took over. Back off. This is my territory. And all the crime syndicates come at him and like have a real knockdown, drag out fight with them, as opposed to this ending with like, I'm not cut out for this, as said earlier. Yeah. I think that would have been the key.
Chris, Boba Fett kind of blamed Jabba the Hutt for what happened to him at the Sarlacc pit, which was his stated motivation for wanting to be a crime lord, right? Because he was like, Boba Fett or Jabba betrayed me, and I want to take over in my weird way of getting revenge so that, other people like me don't get taken advantage of. However, it was really Han and Luke who like kind of kicked his ass, like Jabba didn't do anything. So what do you think of that motivation for like the character to kind of set the story in motion?
I actually liked the idea. I don't think they established it well enough, but I liked the idea of a guy who had spent his career working for other people getting to a point where he wanted to try to do it on his own. I don't know if look, you're all writers. I am not, at least not this kind of writing. I don't know if that's the motivation I would have chosen for the character if I just sit down and write this from scratch, but I don't think it's the worst idea in the world. I just don't think they did anything with it other than have one throwaway line to explain it. Had he not uttered that line of dialogue, would any of us have inferred that motivation from everything else in the series? I don't think so.
So, Richard, as the only award-winning writer on the panel, how would you have handled Boba Fett's character arc? Like, what would you have done to have made his journey believable and also true to the character that we know and love from the original series?
It's I would have had him, have a much lower point. So, when in Return of the Jedi, Boba Fett goes after Luke, and the reason he went after Luke is because there was a bounty, one heck of a bounty on Luke Skywalker. So you could almost see that the dollar signs or credit signs going off in Boba's head when he's like, "Holy crap, Skywalker's here!" And he's like, here's my chance to get him. So it was kind of avarice that made Boba Fett go after Luke, and that's what ended up getting him down into the Sarlacc pit. So he had quite the low point, in the Sarlacc pit. And when he finally climbs out, he gets out, he looks around, he sees Jabba's sail barge was destroyed, and then he's promptly captured by Tuscans and enslaved. And if he had some moment of introspection, he probably would have thought to himself, I got myself in this mess. Because one, I was greedy. Two, I was working for scumbags. And now here I am, no armor. I'm a slave. I'm eating God knows what these Tuscans have. And you stop there and thought to himself, you know what? This is not the life I should be leading. This is not who I should be. And then when he crawls out of that situation and makes himself a better person by learning how to do the Tuscan stick dance around the fire, and then later on seeing the Tuscans wiped out, and he can stop and say, you know what? I should be the person who's protecting people. And then he gets to Mos Espa, and then he wants to start protecting these people. And like why he ever wanted to, help Mos Espa never really came up. Like he's not from there. We never seen the interactions. He just sees these people go like, I guess I'm in charge now. And then he wants to try to protect everybody. It just didn't work. So, his motivations were really very poorly done throughout the whole series. I mean, even the whole time I'm going, why is he doing this? because the Boba that we saw in Empire and Jedi, this is not the same guy. So really, what's prompting this giant change in a person? And we could have seen that done a lot better. I mean, they had the elements there. You know, he climbs out of the Sarlacc, and let's face it, when you pick whatever biological metaphor you want for him getting out of the Sarlacc, but when you are there and then you're enslaved, your life sucks. And when your life sucks, you should stop doing the things that make your life suck and start getting better. And you know, he had that chance to look at himself and reevaluate, and he didn't do it. So it's kind of like, you come on, Dave Filoni, help out a little bit here, you know.
Yeah, typically with an anti-hero type like Boba Fett was, you have two options in terms of character arc, right? So the first option is basically the redemption story, where he goes from being a bad guy into redeeming himself by doing good, right? That's the type of thing that you typically see more often than not. Or you have like the failed redemption, which is kind of like the Unforgiven storyline, where you have the formerly bad guy who's trying to go good, and he fails and he falls back into becoming a worse version of what he was before, and just like wiping out everyone. So like there's that. And then you have a revenge arc, right? Where basically he stays the same kind of like bad guy that he's always been, but he has a noble purpose, which is to get revenge on the people who double crossed him or wronged him or took out someone who didn't deserve it, right? So I feel like we didn't get either of those from the Book of Boba Fett. And because of that, because he was already like a good guy at the beginning of the story, his arc just fell extremely flat. And I would have liked to have seen a little bit more thought put into, his development. I also feel like Fennec Shan came around way too quickly to be like his noble and loyal. Like when she's like trying to tempt him to be like, spice is worth a lot of money, and he's like, no, I'm not going to have that poisoning my people. And she's just like, yeah, okay. You know, like it feels like there should have been a little bit more friction there. Like she should have been harder to win over. And I also feel like the Mandalorian just kind of coming over and being like, you know, my help is on the house, even though like, you know, I'm probably going to die, you know, helping you out. It just didn't ring. None of this show ring very true to me. It felt like Chris said at the beginning, bad fan fiction. But that's all I really wanted to kind of cover about the Book of Boba Fett. I'm sure that we could sit here for hours more and pick it apart and really get deep into like how we would have done it. But it's always easier to kind of look in hindsight at what we got and pick it apart and be like, well, they shouldn't have done this, they shouldn't have done that. And the real challenge to being a good storyteller is inherently knowing these things and avoiding the mistakes that most people fall into. I mean, Richard, you're an award-winning novelist. You know this as well as anyone. If you plan your stuff out ahead of time and you can kind of see all the flaws before you go into production, you tend to basically, you know, avoid these pitfalls. So I want to thank everyone who tuned in tonight and participated in the chat, especially those of you who gave us super chats. So generous. Thank you all so much. Steve, where can people find out more about you if they want to follow you on social media?
I basically just have an Instagram account, then Stephen Ladd, and that's it. Right now, I am semi-retired from writing, although I have some aspirations. I am open to doing reviewing scripts for people. I do it on the house at this point, just taking a look and trying to help people out. So you could reach me there or my LinkedIn account. Yeah, I'm kind of slacking on that. Next time I do this, I'll have something a little more concrete for you guys. But regardless of that, thank you for who all tuned in. Really appreciate it.
Richard, why don't you tell people where they can find your books and mention your Kickstarter again?
Yep. The best place to find my books, go to Amazon.com and type in Richard Fox, and you'll see the Ember War. You'll see the Tier. You'll see Exile Fleet. You'll see all kinds of books. I suggest starting with the Ember War or with Albion Lost. And if you really like comic books, take a look at my Kickstarter and support the Ruins of Othlos book. And we are getting along there. So I've only got almost too much left for the Kickstarter. So go ahead and look at that and let me know if my writing is on par with what I've been criticizing. So thanks a lot, everybody.
And Chris, you run a football podcast. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about it and where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, it's always a pleasure, Matt. Thanks for having me back. Actually, I'm just going to use my time tonight to give some advice to the audience. If you are ever in a situation where you find yourself in a room extracting a promise of neutrality from 4 dangerous heads of crime families who are known for backstabbing and betraying people and doing awful things and have absolutely no good reason to keep a promise to you and all the reason in the world to betray you, don't take them at their word.
In fact, take that opportunity to kill them.
Yes.
Like every other mobster does. Like, I don't know why anyone would ever agree to a dinner because they're like, oh, they're going to kill me. You know, everything from the Untouchables, you know, to the Godfathers. Like, if you go to a dinner with a crime boss, they plan on killing you. So don't do it.
That is true.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight, and tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. We do these streams. We typically do news streams, but every once in a while we like to do these bad writing streams and talk about fun stuff with an expert panel. I want to thank you all for giving us the super chats. All that stuff goes towards the podcast. We reinvest in ourselves to bring you the best possible content we possibly can. And also, please tell your friends to subscribe to the Salty Nerd YouTube channel. Go to saltynerdvideo.com to do that. It's really simple. We're trying to get to 10,000 subscribers before July 4th. If we do that, my co-host Matt Vader has agreed to get a tattoo of our logo on his butt cheek, which we will live stream. We won't live stream his butt. We'll live stream his face as he's getting the tattoo.
It's important clarification.
Yes.
We'll make it a big deal if we hit that 10,000 mark. And also, if you have an iPhone or an iPad or any type of Apple product, please go to Apple Podcasts and leave the Salty Nerd Podcast a 5-star rating. You don't need to write a review, just need a rating. We're trying to get to 200 5-star ratings so that we can be officially accredited as movie reviewers for Rotten Tomatoes. So if you guys can make that happen, we'd really appreciate it. Being an accredited movie reviewer means we're able to get early screeners for reviews. We're able to get press credentials to go to functions and stuff like that. So it would really help us out a lot if you could help us make that happen. And as always, stay salty, my friends.
I will teach you how to ride. I will teach you like a panther. Yes, go, stop, go, stop, go, stop, go, stop. Like a panther, 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 like a panther. Find other panthers, make baby panthers. You're free to roam the dune sea. Go like a panther, like a panther, like a panther. Go, stop, go, stop, go, stop, go, stop. Like a panther, 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 like a panther. Find other panthers, make baby panthers. You're free to roam the dune sea. Go like a panther.